Good afternoon, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, in for Noah Hiles this week on the College Sports Show. And I'm joined today by Andrew Destin, our Penn State beat reporter this past season. I'm a digital sports producer at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Andrew, we've got a lot of Penn State topics to talk about today. How are you?
Doing well, yeah. Certainly an exciting time for Penn State in terms of the transfer portal. It's something that they dipped into a little bit last year with picking up Mitchell Tinsley and a couple of maybe bigger pickups, you could argue, this year with a couple of receivers already. So fascinating time for Penn State via the transfer portal and doing well on my end. Can't complain.
Yeah, we're going to talk some Dante Cephas, Malik McClain here in a second. But just a reminder, if you're joining us for the first time, please pop a like on this video. Help us out with the YouTube algorithm. Please also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos that we do. We do videos pretty much every day of the week. A lot of Steelers talk lately. Matt Canada returning. Christopher Carter tossed that around with 93.7 The Fan's Josh Roundtree yesterday on the North Shore Drive. So if you haven't already, check that out. And of course, the subscription deal down in the description, $6 for 6 months of access to post-gazette.com. Great deal. Gets you, coverage of all of our local sports. So make sure you're checking that out. With that, Andrew, the big news for Penn State football is that they have attracted a couple of big name wide receiver transfers. Dante Cephas from Kent State, also by way of Penn Hills. Pitt was believed to be in the mix for him, but he chooses to go to Penn State instead. And also Malik McClain, a former four-star rated wide receiver who recently played for Florida State. The numbers don't jump off the page with you for either of them, but particularly Cephas was really thought of as one of the best players in the transfer portal. So what do you make, kind of big picture on these acquisitions to Penn State's receivers room?
Yeah, I think big picture wise, this just signals that it could be a step in the right direction for Penn State in terms of the receiving core for the future, in terms of attracting talent. I mean, we've seen it the last couple of years where they've been able to get and develop some guys who end up being NFL draft picks, names that come to mind, like a KJ Hamler, like Jahan Dotson. But both of those guys, you could argue, were a little bit more under the radar. Dotson was originally committed to UCLA and then flipped to Penn State. And then KJ Hamler was the undersized receiver who then developed. But both these guys, you look at them in McClain as well as Cephas. These are big body guys. I believe both of them are bigger than both Dotson and Hamler. I think Dotson 6'1" was right around the same as what Cephas comes in at. But McClain is a big body receiver that Penn State, for Nittany Lion faithful, they really haven't had a guy of this size. Really, you could argue since Juwan Johnson, or if you really want to go further down the rabbit hole, to a Derek Moy, if you go that far back in time. I mean, they just have not had somebody like that on the outside at receiver. Tight end, sure, you've had your Mike Gesicki's, but this signals that maybe they're going to be able to attract some more talent. And I think that if you take the next step, this signals how Penn State is doing a better job of recruiting at those higher profile schools and how that can pay dividends in unexpected ways. And what I mean by that is with Malik McClain, he's a guy who went to IMG Academy. Penn State got Katron Allen out of IMG Academy. You got to believe that played some sort of a factor. It certainly couldn't have hurt in terms of getting him to come over that way. And then, of course, the James Franklin mantra, which has been beat down our throats since he took over the job of dominate the state. I mean, Cephas was in contention with Pitt, as well as some other notable programs like a Georgia, a Notre Dame, UCLA, as well as Oklahoma. All those schools were hot on Cephas. But being a Pennsylvania guy, like you mentioned, from Penn Hills, just another point of James Franklin doing a really good job of getting guys from the state of Pennsylvania to come to Penn State. And we'll see with this receiving room. I know it's a position of turmoil in the sense that some guys are leaving the program. Jaden Dotton has put his name into the transfer portal. Mitchell Tinsley's on the way out. Parker Washington's going to the NFL, but as well as, no receivers coach for the time being since Taylor Stubblefield was let go. So it's a point of flux for the program, but these are two huge pickups that signal that things could be going in the right direction, even if they might have not looked that way, say, a week ago, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the Stubblefield angle to this. Obviously, he was relieved, I think, to some people's surprise earlier this week. Well after, you usually start to see some of those personnel decisions on a staff made. We're, coming up on February, and you would have expected him to be around for next year at this point. But James Franklin going in another direction. Where do you think that move fits with what we've seen? Was it a matter of that he wasn't the guy for these receivers that Penn State was targeting, and that's why he had to go? Was there something else? What was your read on that situation?
Yeah, it definitely caught me off guard, and I think upon further review, just looking at it more, it might be performance related. I'm not really sure. There could be other factors at play, based on what I've been able to interpret from it. But if you look at strictly the on-field performance, there's something to be said about the fact that recruiting maybe wasn't at the level that Penn State wanted it to be at the receivers position. Mentioned Jaden Dotton. They got a lot of other guys in that 22 recruiting cycle. Kaden Saunders comes to mind. But the reality was they weren't recruiting at the high enough level at receiver that they needed to be. And you look at the 2023 cycle, which for the most part was a pretty solid recruiting class for Penn State, was a top 20 class, but receiver was not a area that they did a very good job of. In that area, they got one receiver, Carmelo Taylor out of Roanoke, Virginia, a 3-star recruit. That's not to say he won't be a good player, but in today's college football world where you're trying to surround a 5-star quarterback with talent, getting one receiver just isn't going to cut it. And so getting 2 pickups in the transfer portal is huge, but I don't know if that's related to Stubblefield. I got to believe actually it's the inverse, that it maybe signaled that it was coming after the news, or the players are at least informed that, hey, this guy isn't going to be the guy moving forward. So I think this is an indictment on that Stubblefield didn't do a good enough job in recruiting. It was certainly an area that he prioritized as one of the recruiting overseers for that offensive side of the football, but certainly didn't do a good enough job of it there. Did develop talent in his couple of seasons there with getting Dotson to the NFL, but just not enough for what James Franklin probably was looking at from that coach position.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the receivers statistically, I don't think there's much of an argument that they underachieved this year. I think there was a lot of hope that Parker Washington, obviously he had that huge game against Ohio State, but otherwise, I don't think that he was the player that a lot of people were hoping he would be. I think there was hope that Mitch Tinsley could be a much more explosive player. He had 1,400 receiving yards at Western Kentucky in 2021. I think that was going to be hard to repeat, but I think, again, you were looking at that relationship to yield a little bit more than I think like in the 500-yard range like it did this season. So I think there's definitely a performance argument to be made. I just think it wasn't high on a lot of people's radars. Andrew, I want to talk about, briefly, are there any names you're looking at to possibly replace Taylor Stubblefield?
Yeah, within the program, it's interesting. I can't say there's anybody directly within Penn State's program that you would see as a position of elevation, but I'm thinking this is probably going to be something on the James Franklin coaching tree. In terms of that search, it's probably going to be a national one. And got to believe this is going to be something where Franklin's going to exhaust all his sorts of connections. But this could be something where maybe they have a name already lined up. One name that comes to mind for me would be Bobby Ingram. Penn State fans remember him as a receiver for the team back in the 90s. He would be somebody that if they could lure him away from his current post, that would be somebody to take over that spot. It's a dream ask, but it's one that's been rumored. And if that's the guy that they're pegging to replace Taylor Stubblefield, that would be certainly a reason for letting Stubblefield go, would be if they could land Ingram, because that would be a step in the right direction, certainly a promotion there.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of love for Bobby Ingram, and so that would make a lot of sense. Andrew, I want to ask about where this receiving corps stands, and with these transfer additions, with Keandre Lambert Smith, who obviously had the massive reception in the Rose Bowl, I think played well against Ohio State. Wasn't consistent enough, I don't think, for you to believe that he's shown that he can be like a number 1 or a number 2 next year. I think that's something he's going to have to prove on the field in 23. But where do you think that this receiving corps stands? Is it good enough to win a Big Ten championship? Is it good enough to compete for a playoff spot? Is it good enough to compete for a national championship? Or is there still work to be done here?
It certainly helps to get the 2 guys through the portal, but with the current cast of characters, I mean, Harrison Wallace III, Keandre Lambert Smith, nice pieces. This is a huge year for Lambert Smith to step up and become a number 1 or number 2 receiver. And I don't know if he has that in it. That's not an attack against him. It's just like you said, he's been inconsistent. He's been hampered by injuries. In the Purdue game, he was maligned for his drops. He's a guy who at times has been questioned for his work ethic earlier on in his career. He's sort of fixed up those problems, but Lambert Smith is somebody who definitely will have to see what he actually can provide in year number 4 with the program. But after the Rose Bowl, I mean, like you said, had a solid performance there. That was arguably his best game as a Nittany Lion. And made it clear to me that, the best is yet to come, that it's all on the up and up for him. So consistency is the name of the game for Lambert Smith. And Wallace III, he was just another guy who flashed at times in that Michigan game, had a long reception, was a deep threat at times, but not consistent behind Tinsley and Washington. So when evaluating this receiver core, obviously Drew Aller is going to play a huge role in that group's production. But in terms of whether it's a Big Ten championship level group, whether it's a college football playoff qualifying group, I'm going to say probably not there yet, just because you look around the conference, you look around college football. I mean, God, Ohio State returns Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming. That group is still, regardless of who you pick up in the transfer portal, that group is head and shoulders above Penn State. So I think they still have some work to do. What they have working for them is that you get some good tight ends back in Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren, as well as the development of North Allegheny grad Khalil Dinkins. But the receiving group right now, solid. It helps to pick up McClain as well as Cephas, probably a step below the likes of an Ohio State. And based on who Michigan's bringing back with Cornelius Johnson and others too, probably a step below them as well.
The Penn State's, they're in an interesting position, with where they are as a program, because I think the expectations are going a lot higher next season. They have Drew Aller, probably stepping in at quarterback. Is some of the success we're seeing the effect of having a 5-star guy who people want to play with, at that position, as opposed to a Sean Clifford, who I think we both agree, had a ceiling. I don't know if we'll see if Drew Aller has a ceiling. You'll see if we end up in Anthony Morelli territory. But are we at a point now where, he's a guy that other receivers are looking at and saying, this is a guy we want to play with? And is that possibly an advantage for Penn State, not just this season, but maybe for the next couple?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, look at USC, what happened with dragging Jordan Addison out there from Pitt. I mean, when you have it's twofold, right? When you have an explosive offensive play caller like Lincoln Riley and you pair that with a great quarterback like Caleb Williams, the talent is going to follow. And that's exactly what happened at USC, and it's what's going to continue to happen there. And, not to, continue with the Lincoln Riley point, but look at the quarterbacks who transferred there and look who they were able to produce in NFL talent. I think the point is that if you have a quarterback or somebody who at least has that kind of potential talent like a Drew Aller does, players are going to want to go there. And I think it's no secret. I mean, Dante Cephas truly could have gone to any elite program that he wanted to in the country and played for other great quarterbacks. I mean, Hartman's transferring from Wake Forest to Notre Dame. That's the all-time ACC leader in touchdown passes, I believe. He could have gotten to play with them. And he said, no, I'd rather go to Penn State and catch passes from Drew Aller. That says a lot. That's significant, and that's important for building a program going forward. So I think the value, the importance of a quarterback, we talk about it in the NFL. It's the most important position. It's the highest paid position. It's college football. Guys are just making money through the NIL. But if you have somebody like an Aller, that is huge for developing your recruiting portfolio. And we've seen it already through the portal. And I think this isn't going to end anytime soon. And I think the next cycle, assuming whoever the receivers coach ends up being is able to be a solid recruiter, it's only going to go upward for Penn State there in that regard.
I want to wrap up the receiver talk by asking, if you had to pick one guy who you think might get to the 500 receiving mark next year, whose name is not Keandre Lambert Smith or one of these two transfers, who's your pick or picks, if you have two, of guys that are in this program that you think have a chance to step up and really be more involved than we saw this season?
Yeah, one of the names already brought him up, Harrison Wallace III, but another one, Kaden Saunders. He's a guy that I'm looking at as really didn't get any time of consequence for the Nittany Lions last year as a true freshman, and he was pegged as one of the best recruits from that recruiting cycle that had Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen. I'm really high on him just because he kind of got buried down the depth chart there, but as he gets more time with the departures of Washington and Tinsley, I know you got Cephas coming in as well as McClain, but Saunders brings a different element, and he was really well thought of coming out of high school. He's a 4-star recruit as well, somebody that I'm pretty high on, and if he gets his chance, somebody who can make plays in space. And of course, Wallace III, he's a deep threat. He's a home run hitter. So even if he only gets 25 catches, 30 catches, something like that, he easily could rack up 500 yards in an offense that I personally believe, even with the two great running backs in Singleton and Allen, is probably going to be more pass dominant than it was last year.
The other big transfer get for Penn State in this cycle so far, this is going back a little while. I believe it happened before the Rose Bowl while everyone was out in LA. But Storm Duck, great name, coming to Penn State from North Carolina. He's a cornerback. What do you think his ability is to step in and maybe make Penn State miss Joey Porter Jr. a little bit less? Because obviously Joey Porter Jr. is a all Big Ten selection. He looks like he's going to be a first-round draft pick. If not, he's probably at least a second or a third. What do you think of Storm Duck's ability to step in and help this defense? Weather that loss, and obviously the secondary is losing Jair Brown as well. So there's a veteran element that he's bringing to the table.
100%. And they're likely losing Marquise Wilson too. He's put his name into the transfer portal. So there's another cornerback that you're losing. I think it's really interesting to see how Terry Smith and Manny Diaz proceed with the cornerbacks, especially with the addition of Storm Duck, because I'm somebody who's been very high on another Penn Hills guy in Daquan Hardy since he's been at Penn State. And he's kind of been relegated to that nickelback role. Not to say that he hasn't played much, but just that he hasn't been a down after down cornerback. I'm really curious how they proceed to go with Storm Duck, because you could either continue to leave Hardy at that nickel spot, and then you could be looking at Storm Duck as, the other starting cornerback opposite of Kalen King, who, by all indications, based off of last season, had a phenomenal first year as a starter. He'll be cornerback number one. The question to me is Hardy CB2, or are you putting Storm Duck into that spot, or one of the other guys within that, deep rotation of cornerbacks that they've recruited over the last couple of years? So I think his presence is huge. It's kind of in with the new, out with the old, him replacing the role of Marquise Wilson, but maybe a more prominent one, of course, without Joey Porter Jr. So big pickup there. I think he's going to be getting a lot of playing time. There's no question about that. It's more just what kind of role does he go into. Personally, I'd maybe be putting him into the nickel, but now get paid the big bucks. So maybe keeping Hardy there as a nickelback for a third year straight. Some continuity there, who knows? But it certainly doesn't hurt to put him into the program.
The other area where I think things have been in a little bit of flux since at least you and I last talked is along the offensive line. Bryce Effner stepping away from football. Juice Scruggs declaring for the NFL draft. So those are a couple big losses, but obviously you hold on to Olu Fashanu and some of those other guys. Where do you think that group stands? Do you think that's championship caliber? Because offensive line is always a point of concern for Penn State fans. It hasn't necessarily been the strong suit of the Franklin regime in terms of development, but I think we saw a lot of good signs this year. What's your assessment of where that group stands?
I think it's really close. I think it's closer to championship caliber than the receiving corps is, that's for sure. The left side of the line is really the huge question mark. You mentioned Olu Fashanu. What kind of version do they get from him coming back from an injury that was essentially season-ending? Had a shot to play in the Rose Bowl, but elected not to. Landon Tengwall had the season-ending injury last year prior to the Michigan game. Those two guys, are stalwarts on the left side of the offensive line. And I got to believe without Juice Scruggs, you'll have Hunter Norzad sliding in to take over that center spot. You'll have Sal Wormley at right guard. And it could be Drew Shelton starting at right tackle. I know Caden Wallace was there, and he rotated with Bryce Effner. That could be Drew Shelton's spot. Those are five names you got to feel pretty good about if you're a Penn State fan. I mean, those guys played really, for the most of the season, they played very well on that offensive line. So I think it's close to being championship caliber. It certainly is good enough to win you the Big Ten. Maybe not quite good enough yet, or at that level to be in the running for a college football playoff championship or making the playoff, one of those type of groups that could carry you over. But the ingredients are placed in the sense of having two very strong running backs and having not just five good offensive linemen, but some depth there as well. And a key, as we all know in college football, some continuity, because aside from losing Juice Scruggs, for the most part, you're returning 3.5, 4 guys who were essentially getting starters reps last year. And Hunter Norzad, smart call to Phil Troutwine and the Penn State coaching staff that they're able to get him some reps throughout the year at practice at center, as well as just get him reps in general, because the world after Juice Scruggs was coming, and now it's here, and it seems more than likely he'll take over at center. So it's a spot to feel happy about if you're Penn State.
Andrew, that's all I got for you. Any final thoughts on Penn State in the past month since the Rose Bowl? If you're a Penn State fan, how are you feeling about this team compared to where you were after the Rose Bowl, which I think was already a pretty good feeling for a lot of fans?
Yeah, you're probably feeling a little bit better, which is crazy enough to think because you were riding high after an 11-2 season that, by all indications, exceeded expectations. They did what was asked of them and more. So to pick up a couple of guys in the portal, as well as Storm Duck at cornerback, you get the 2 receivers. You're in a pretty good spot if you're Penn State. The only thing that maybe could be troubling is that the schedule next year, having to travel at Columbus for a team in Ohio State that, they have to replace a quarterback, but for the most part, that's an Ohio State team that you got to be a little scared of. And then, of course, Michigan doesn't look like they'll be changing over much, if at all, with J.J. McCarthy coming back and Blake Corum, as well as Harbaugh staying at coach there. So there's obviously some roadblocks still in place there for Penn State, but I feel pretty good. You're right up there with the best of the conference knocking on the door. It's just a question of whether or not they can crack the code.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I'll be honest with you. I think Michigan's the big fish now. It's been Ohio State for a long time, but I haven't been impressed enough by Ohio State in this last handful of outings. I go back to the game that they probably should have lost in Happy Valley a year ago. It's interesting how the times change because I really do think Michigan is the key to Penn State, taking that next step. I think Michigan's in that spot now. It's not Ohio State.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, the physicality they play with, we saw it last year. Come on, they ran for 400 yards against Penn State's defense. And no more PJ Must for next year. They returned a lot of the guys on that D-line. But Penn State's going to have its work cut out trying to stop that run game because, hey, it's pretty much everybody coming back. You got your quarterback who's a youngster coming back for a second year as a starter, only third year in the program. Corum returns. Edwards, that's a scary bunch if you're Penn State.
Yeah. Even though you got them coming to Happy Valley, I think this is going to be one of the best Michigan teams we've seen come through Happy Valley in some time. Anyway, Andrew, this was a great conversation. I appreciate you hopping on today. I'll be out for the rest of the next week. You'll be in the capable hands of Noah Hiles on Tuesday and Thursday next week. So make sure you check out the Post-Gazette Now YouTube channel for that content. Obviously, also stay tuned for the North Shore Drive. Lots of Steelers talk with Christopher Carter. Maybe some Pitt Hoops talk because that's his area of expertise now as well, and they're playing well. So make sure you're signed up for all of that. And then I'll look forward to seeing you guys when I get back from vacation in 2 weeks. Andrew, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, pleasure's all mine. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.